Awesome.
Perfect.
Carlos, so great to meet you. How you doing? How you holding up?
I'm doing great. Leaning into this new, virtual Sundance world. It's a shame we couldn't be there in person, but it's still a magnificent opportunity. So
I agree. We could talk to everybody all over the world. There are some benefits. So at least you can, you probably could get more press in this way, I think. So,
that's what I've heard. That's true. That's very true.
Absolutely. Well, congratulations on this. And man, look, the first episode of, that I saw, wow, very powerful. And I had the opportunity to talk to Brigitte and Sebastián, your leads. And I said, there is nobody in the world that cannot relate to this story, because we all have ancestors, grandparents, great-grandparents, whatever, that came to the new world to make a better life for our family. So when did you decide that you wanted to take your parents' story and say, I gotta tell this story?
Bonnie, I spent a lot of my early 20s as a filmmaker pursuing genre. I was obsessed with genre. I'm a failed genre filmmaker. And my first feature was like a crime thriller. And, it just was something that it didn't come across. But what I did find was that I imbued my first feature with a lot of personal and anecdotal themes. And so I discovered in the last 5 years that I think what I'm really good at, or at least what I think I'm really good at, is making stories not only about myself, but about people that I know. Okay. And so I've been sort of exploring this sort of lane of storytelling and filmmaking. Right. And so Chiqui is, the true life story of my parents. Yep. And I, growing up, was just always fascinated by specifically how my mother would relay to me the stories of my parents' first few years in the country. And on top of that, I had visual components to look at. I've had these, old photo albums and these things that I look like that, there was very well documented chronology of my parents coming to the country. And I was just so fascinated looking at these photos. And I think a lot of my early interest in film and storytelling was looking at these photos and sort of projecting my own ideas and what I thought my parents would go through. And there's just something about, like, maybe it's just I have a bias because I was born in the 80s and the culture and the music and everything about the 80s. I was just always so fat. I've always just reviewed everything from a very nostalgic lens. Right. So Chiqui was just sort of a natural extension of my interest as a filmmaker, because narrativizing and having a romantic kind of view of what the past was is something that that's just what I thrive in. And so also on top of all of that, growing up as a first generation Latino immigrant, when people would find out that I was from Colombia, immediately they would be like, "Oh, so your parents are, they know Pablo Escobar, or you know where to get the good cocaine." I'm like, haha.
Yeah, no, not exactly. Yeah.
And so, I mean, there was just a period of time of Colombian history, and there was a mass exodus, of course, from Colombians to the United States in the late 80s and the early 90s. And there's just always a stigma attached to what it meant to be Colombian in the United States during that time period. And so all of the films that I saw about the Colombian immigrant experience from not only the 80s, but also just in contemporary depictions of them, they're definitely very salient. They're very poignant. But I just always felt that these stories were very predicated on the drug trade, or on the violence, or on the external hardships, which of course they're a part of our history, and they're something that cannot be ignored and should be told. But I wanted to see something that gave the characters an opportunity and a space to be more three-dimensional, to have it focus more on their internal lives, on language, the struggle of assimilation, of being part of a culture that is where the language and everything was not in their favor.
Right.
And ultimately, I think that Chiqui is, and what you said is, you brought up an interesting point. A lot of people can relate to this. It's sort of a universal story, because
100%.
It is a story that I view it it's a very American story for me, because the challenges and the setbacks that Chiqui and Carlos go through as immigrants is also what kind of we go through as members of the society. We all want that thing. We all want that American dream, whether it's something like a white picket fence in the suburbs to being at Sundance. And so I view it, I think that I was able to imbue the story from a perspective of being critical of of the United States and and capitalism and hierarchy and racial class privileges, that, and also being critical of, like, Colombian and Latino sort of stereotypes
Right,
and norms and
representation.
tradition,
Yeah,
representation. So I
yeah.
just been very fortunate enough to be able to be a filmmaker, and just to, what I think is, I have a unique perspective on telling the story. And I think and I've just been so floored with people who have watched it and it's really resonated with them, and across cultures and across languages, people have really taken to the story, and I'm really happy about that.
Boy, are you ever lucky to have had some, photos and things to document and to for you to look back on, because, look, it's not like they had cell phones like we have now. Like, hey, look, we're on the boat. Like, that's amazing
Right.
that they had that force, like, to take pictures. That's wow, what a gift.
Yeah, absolutely. And so my mother had a background she wanted to be a journalist when she was
Yeah,
growing up. So for her, being vocal about being, always telling her story and relaying things in this very animated way, in this very specific way. Also, she's a storyteller in her own right. And so, like, really, it's her influence really influenced me, not only my perspective and my sensibility, but also, like, my career as a filmmaker.
for sure. Amazing. Wow, how
Yeah.
lucky you are. That's fantastic. Choosing your leads, Brigitte and
Right.
Sebastian are so good. Were they difficult to find? And, like I said, they really embody. It must have been a kind of an outer body experience for you watching them play your parents.
Yeah, I was very fortunate. So, Bridget, I met Bridget over 5 years ago. We used to work at a restaurant together. We were both aspiring artists and filmmakers and everything. And when I remember meeting her at first, I was just so taken by, and she was such an eccentric, such an anime, an interesting person. And I was like, man, she really reminds me of my mother in this way. Her and my mom share very similar things. They're very outspoken. They're very funny.
Wow.
They just have a very unique perspective on things. And when, we were always talking about making a film together, doing a project together. And I remember when I was like, oh, well, I've always wanted to make a film about my parents. And when I presented it to Bridget, she was just, I'm on board, let's do it. And she introduced me to Sebastian and to Catherine French.
Yeah.
I'm an independent filmmaker. Chiqui was completely self-financed by me, and so I didn't have the resources or the budget really to get like a casting director that was able to do a very extensive casting process, because it was very important for Chiqui that the characters who played my parents also embodied the language, the accents, because it's very
Yes.
particular to my mother is from Bogota and my father's from Medellin, and both Sebastian and Bridget are from those respective parts.
Yeah.
And so it was very important. Like, it was just a perfect storm. It just happened where she knew someone that connected me to this other person. There's like, we need to make this right now, because if I don't, I'm never going to have this opportunity ever again. And so
Yeah.
that's how it came about. And in terms of how, how surreal it was to see them portray my parents. I try not to get bogged down on being too sentimental or romantic about, like, these people. I'm like, okay, this is a story about my parents,
Yeah.
and these two actors, they're artists. They're bringing their own interpretation of what these characters are. And at a certain point, I had to let go of, like, okay, she wouldn't do it this way, or my dad wouldn't do this way. But but I didn't even have to go through that, because they just so perfectly embody these characters, because they shared similar experiences to these characters, that there wasn't, what was for them was just to understand the story and the lines that were on the screenplay, but everything else they just pulled from their own experience, and it was just also a form of catharsis for them, because that's what their parents had gone through as well.
Right. Yeah, no, 100%. The people who have had the opportunity to view this, and now, of course, more people will see it at Sundance and stuff. And so, fingers crossed for you that this goes somewhere. And because
Mhm.
I want to see more adventures of this family, no question
Yeah.
about it. But at the end of the day, Carlos, like I said, there's been some really good buzz, and people are relating to this, no matter what religion you are, whatever. It doesn't matter, because everybody's had these experiences. What do you hope that audiences will take from it after they watch it?
Like I said, I think that this story is, to look at it things from my short-ended side, because I am American. I think it's a very American story, but I also think it's a very human story, and it's a universal story. I think anyone can relate to it, whether, I think people who have immigrated to this country or other countries can directly relate to it. But I
Yeah.
think people across across cultures and across language can really take to the story, because it really is a human story. And I think a lot of people can find things to identify with both Chiqui or
Mhm.
Carlos or Judy or whoever, because, you know, we're all kind of, you know, we're all kind of, we all share similar experiences regardless of the circumstances.
Absolutely, 100%. Well, congratulations to you. It's really, really well done. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Bonnie.
Thank you for your time today. Best of luck with everything. And
Thank you
you know,
so much.
hopefully, you know, we'll see you at the Toronto International Film Festival one year. I need to see you in person. So aim for that, okay?
Oh yeah. Yeah, we're definitely gonna, we'll see. I'll see you there, Bonnie.
All righty. Take care, Carlos. Thank you for your
Thank you.
time.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.